Out of Exodus chapter 8, starting in verse 1, going through verse 15. We saw God starts his work. He starts his work with the rod that he threw down. Moses threw down and turned it into a snake. Of course, Pharaoh's people could do the same thing, but Moses' rod ate up the other snakes. Pharaoh ignored it. And then last week we spoke about the first great miracle, the turning of the Nile into blood. And it was interesting because the Nile itself was considered a god. It's kind of interesting because it was actually considered the god that spawned the other gods, because the Nile River was supposed to have created itself and then created the whole world and all the other Egyptian gods. So this is like the top of the heap. And the first thing that God attacks is the Nile. And the blood that is life for everything became toxic to the Egyptians because they couldn't drink it. Of course, his people again could turn water into blood, but it didn't help him because he couldn't get rid of it. Now we come to the second great miracle. Chapter 8, verse 1. It said, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, Go unto Pharaoh, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me." The focus is, let his people go. "And if thou refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all thy borders with frogs. And the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into thine house, and into thine bedchamber, and upon thy bed, and into the house of all of thy servants, and upon thy people, and into thine ovens, and into thy kneading troughs. And the frogs shall come up both on thee and upon thy people and upon all thy servants." So this is pretty comprehensive. It's interesting because guess what? Frogs were a god as well. Yes, there was a god of life and fertility to the Egyptians. So what does God do? The second thing, he comes and he attacks another god. So this is supposed to be a good thing, right? Life and fertility, and so these gods are supposed to be a good thing, these frogs. And guess what? The frogs are now a problem. Verse 5, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Stretch forth thine hand with thy rod over the streams, over the rivers, and over the ponds, and cause frogs to come up upon the land of Egypt." It's interesting because these frogs were actually edible. But that's a whole different issue. "And Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. And the magicians did so with their enchantments and brought up frogs upon the land of Egypt." So it's like, okay, they're saying, yeah, we can do the same thing, but they can't fix the problem. So this is the third one they said they could match. But it's interesting. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, "Entreat the Lord that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go, that they may also do sacrifice unto the Lord." And Moses said unto Pharaoh, "Glory over me. When shall I entreat for thee and for thy servants and for thy people to destroy the frogs from thee and thy houses, that they may remain in the river only?" And he said, "Tomorrow." And Moses said, "Be it according to thy word, that thou mayest know that there is none like unto the Lord our God.
Amen.
And the frogs shall depart from thee, and from thy houses, and from thy servants, and from thy people. They shall remain in the river only." And Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried unto the Lord because of the frogs which he had brought against Pharaoh. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and the frogs died out of the houses, out of the villages, and out of the fields, and they gathered them together upon heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was respite, he hardened his heart and hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. Now there's, apart from the fact that God brought judgment against another god of Egypt, there's a number of interesting things happen in this situation. It's easy to skip over it, but you can see the progressive hand of God here. The first one is, this is the first time Pharaoh says to Moses, "Ask your God to get rid of the frogs." He doesn't go to his own people. He knows that's a waste of time. He goes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh goes to Moses and says, "Ask God to get the frogs out of my land." Why is that so important? Pharaoh considered himself a god. But he couldn't do it. So he had to go to someone who could do it. He knew his people couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. So he went to Moses. Moses brought the frogs and he said, well, I better ask Moses to get rid of it. So already God is working in the life of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's starting to recognize that there's a power here that he doesn't have that Moses has. The second thing that's really interesting is what Moses says. Tomorrow, he says, be it according to thy word, that thou mayest know that there is none like unto the Lord our God, and the frogs shall depart from thee, and from thy houses, from thy servants, and from thy people, and they shall remain in the river only. How did Moses know? By faith. This is the first time that Moses actually spoke proactively about what's going to happen in terms of when he takes action and he goes to God, this is what's going to happen. Because he asked God. That never happened before. The snakes he had no control over. The river turned into blood. Well, that washed through. But this time, Pharaoh asked him for something, and this time he said, this is what God is going to do. So we see the hand of God working here. The first thing that happens is Pharaoh recognizes, maybe I'm not such a big God anymore. Maybe there's a God bigger than me. And Pharaoh knows that. And Moses knows that God, but I don't know him. He's got the power, so I better go ask him to get rid of the frogs. These same things that were worshipped in the country have now become a nuisance. I better ask Moses to get rid of them. And he does. But the other thing is, the faith of Moses has now been increased. In the midst of all of this, now, it looks like he's just walking through. It's not that simple. Because up till now, and including now, everything is happening to Egypt is happening to the Jews as well. They're not real excited about the water turning to blood. I gotta imagine how many of you women would like to go home and see everything that has water in it is now turned to blood. I can't imagine that would be really. You wouldn't be declaring the glory of God in that situation. So he's got to live with people that aren't really so happy about all this stuff going on. The frogs are up in the face of the Jews as well. So he commands, but in the process of doing this, his faith is stronger. In the process of carrying this burden, and it is a burden. Why? Because God's asking him to do it, but he still remembers Pharaoh. That's like walking into the face of the President of the United States and telling the President what to do. Except bigger, because the President, at least not yet, doesn't think he's God, but this guy did. Pharaoh thought he was God. And so it's like he could have just go kill him. Get him out of my way. Never happened. God didn't allow it. But you still have to have the faith to believe that. Moses had the strength to believe that, to tell them about the judgments that were coming, and then actually call them off. There's faith building in Moses. So what's the point of the story? God's going to ask you to do stuff. It's going to challenge your faith. How do you expect faith to grow? It has to be challenged. And you're going to have to do it in the face of challenges to that faith, because there's going to be, every time God asks you to rise up in faith, your situation is going to tell you, no, you can't do it. And there's only one answer. I agree, I can't do it. But God can. That's right. That's right. Remember, ladies, I can't. I can't. That's what you want to remember. But God can. Amen. And I'm trusting him, not me. That's what it's all about. It's like, can I trust God? Can I trust God when he talks to me? Can I trust him? Can I believe him for what he says? If I do, I better be able to speak it. If I can't speak it, I don't believe him. I better be able to speak it, even if I have to speak it in the mirror before I have to speak it. You better practice it. You better be ready for the challenge. But when the challenge comes, be ready to stand up and speak it. God will always back himself up. He will always be glorified. But you've got to give him the chance to be glorified in your life.
Amen.
That's our message today.
Oh.